Have a really dark background. That's because we just moved to a new office and the electrician was here yesterday and didn't finish the work. So it's okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This is our third roundtable, and I just wanted to tell you that I looked at the locations of the people who registered, and I saw people from New Zealand, Brazil, South Korea, and it filled my heart with joy. So thank you so much. Today's topic is, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. I'm based out of Toronto. We're doing these roundtables, discussions, and we have one rule. The project is not in Toronto, and that is to really learn from our colleagues and peers overseas or whatever in America. And today's topic is about the urban transformation that transit infrastructure creates. So it's kind of TOD is a really big topic, and we were looking for ways to really narrow it down. And with that, I want to, so in case you wonder where the third speaker is, we have, he pre-recorded his presentation because he's in Singapore, and I think the time difference, so it will be 10 p.m. In Singapore right now. So let's get started with Johannes. The project is in Stockholm. Johannes, please introduce yourself and let's get started.
Thank you very much. Johannes Torwart is my name. As said, based in the very north of Europe, I would say. I'd like to show you one fairly big project we are doing right now at the moment in our office in Sweco, which is to the south of the city center here in Stockholm. But I just give you a brief background to who I am, which is probably quite it's necessary. I was taught during the 80s and the 90s, and my school, one could say, was Hammarby Sea Town just at the southern fringe of Stockholm, which was a paradigm shift in urban design and in public transport, I would say, and in many other fields as well during the 90s. It's still not quite finished, but it's a urban development going on, and it's really the revival of, let's say, urban space in many ways, and it's a very sort of clear sort of concept about what's a street or what is a space, and it has a certain, of course, density across. I was fortunate then in the early 2006, I won a competition in Vienna, another sea town, or a lake town rather, in Vienna, just outside to the east of Vienna. And why I mention it, it's sort of, it took me from Stockholm down to Europe, and also to a mega project in the Vienna outskirts, where public transport and connectivity was at the very core of the business, one could say. And just showing you this image from 2012 of the Vienna project, where the city and the state invested 2.2 billion euro alone in bringing the metro line to the space, or to the site. And now, of course, a fully integrated part of the urban realm and the space. Back to Sweden then. Overseas, sometimes you mix Sweden and Switzerland in this complex map of Europe, but we are to the north, and you can see the polar circle, a funny thing in comparison how you live in Canada. And looking down then to Stockholm, it's to the very east to the southeast of the country, one could say. And it's situated between the lake, Mälaren, and the Baltic Sea, in a quite intense kind of landscape, tense relationship to hills and to lakes and water, of course. And one of our tools here in Stockholm is we have many tools to plan cities. One is the regional planning tool, tool, which is actually very important in terms of planning, long-term planning for public transport and rails and roads, etc., so that the city sort of is working as a whole, of course. And my project I like to talk about here is one of these regional nodes, which you could almost see here in the map, that the very city center, the very core of this meeting point between the Baltic and the Baltic Sea and the lake occurs in the straight in the center of town. And now the ambition is to create nodes, urban nodes in a half circle around the city center. And the project I like to talk about here is the blue circle around it. Another important topic for driving urban design and infrastructure development here is, of course, equality issues and ways, social ways ahead. And there is always an ambition connected to big projects like this. One can see to the south, as in many other cities around the globe, that in the southern part of the city is more the income is lower and education generally lower, and this initiative here is to turn it around and to create more prosperity in the south. And this is the site of the new regional hub. Difficult to imagine, but it's actually surrounded by vast housing areas, or vast but big scale housing areas, and a huge hospital, one of Europe's biggest hospitals, but of course it's cut in two, or more or less destroyed by national rail lines, etc., and all these barriers. And it was also planned in a time where, from the modernist time, so to speak, segregating people and functions and housing and industry, etc. So it's all had its spot, and in the middle of this, of course, the railway. And what's happening now is that this kind of infrastructure project is developing even further. High-speed rail, large-scale motorways. Doesn't seem to be very modern, but it's happening. Personally, unfortunately, but and in this we have been commissioned to develop a new city core, actually, which is quite abstract as an idea. How could you sort of create a new heart in this kind of context? And trying to integrate, or at least reduce the barriers of the infrastructure, present and future infrastructure. And this is quite driven by density, for example, 5,000 housing and a huge amount of workspaces, etc. So it's a high dense area, which you can see on this early stage rendering here. Trying to focus, of course, on the extremely complicated edges around rail tracks and the topography of the site, and also we've been dealing a lot with the functional aspects of the new core of this kind of city, and which makes this into some kind of three-dimensional monster on all levels. And also governed a lot by because this is a valley, we have the issues of stormwater and topography and artificial sort of levels in the city space or in the cityscape. So it's a super complex kind of planning thing. And as I mentioned already, the whole issue of water, stormwater treatment, etc., is an integral part of this kind of scheme, more and more so, of course, due to things. And this is already in the early sketches implemented in public space, in street, and in the ways courtyards are distributed, and also how the sort of the urban structure has been developed, allowing water and water penetration, etc., and cleansing of water and the storm water aspect as well. And the other part of doing a thing like this, immediately next to very substantial public transport system is, of course, to enable diversity of life across an area like this, and inviting fundamentally new aspects of life. And so this has been already in the early part. What is a space, for example? How does it link? How does it grasp into the surroundings, this rather poor area in general? And running towards then, these are just images from the current revision of the previous image. We are now looking into much more detail of things, and we also start to we have entered into the formal stage of the inner circle here of the actual city center, and together with the landowner and the local authority, and these are just images showing, and of course, again, just highlighting the issues of the barriers, the future station areas and the bridges across, and dealing with this kind of edge situation. And despite all this, create some kind of calm and intensity in the urban fabric at this stage. And of course, we're dealing with a lot of unknown issues. You know, when can a station be built? And yet at the same time, we need to start development in the area. And then especially the issues of long-term connections and street patterns are at the very sensitive issues because of many still unresolved issues. But we are trying to, this is kind of leading to my final image actually, we are working very tightly together with the region as such, politicians, one could say, and the civil servants in the local authority, and we are also connecting them back to the early slides here. We are very much dependent on the overall ideas of how this city will work in the next couple of 50 or 10 decades, up to 50 years ahead. And this is just an image showing a potential first stage of this development. Thank you so much. I think I've done my 10 minutes. If so, over to James O'Brien.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jans. That was really great. So let me just okay. Okay, so thanks firstly to Nama and the team at Smart Density for having me on board today for this webinar. I'm James O'Brien from Spatial Design Hub. We're a mapping and spatial analysis design agency based in London. We work within the built environment, creating maps and analyzing data to help design better spaces and places for people. Today, I'm going to look into a sort of a hypothetical situation, not really a project, but how we might use spatial analysis to identify some key locations for transit-orientated developments within our cities. So before we decide on the best locations for TODs, we need to first understand a little bit more about our transit networks, how they operate, how useful they are for people who use them, and any areas which might potentially need improvement, etc. A successful and accessible transport network will reduce private vehicle usage and promote a more sustainable and thriving environment around our transit hubs, leading to more successful trading, more integrated communities, and better air quality due to less private vehicle usage. So to do this, we're going to have a quick look today at three elements, geospatial elements: accessibility to public transport, population densities, and proximity to services and amenities within our cities. And we're going to look at how each of these factors might contribute towards locating transit-orientated developments. And if we can answer all these, we can use these parameters to identify the best locations for TODs, as well as what sort of potential development could take place in these areas to create more integrated communities around our transit hubs. So to step one, we would carry out a public transport accessibility level assessment. Here in London, TfL, who are Transport for London, our transport department, developed a tool called PTAL, Public Transport Accessibility Tool, which measures accessibility to public transport. So we've gone and created scripts and using GIS and Python to use this anywhere in the world, basically. And the model looks into 4 parameters: the frequency, which is the frequency of the services per hour, the distance from any start point on the network or on the city to its nearest stop for each transit node, the wait time at that location, so the wait time between services, and finally a reliability factor on how reliable the service is at that particular location. So as we all know, not all of our cities behave in the same way. So first we need to set some parameters about walk times to transit nodes. So here in the UK, we use 8 minutes to a bus stop and 12 minutes to a railway or light railway station. But however, you know, depending on your environment, those people might not necessarily be willing to walk that length of time if it's too hot or if it's too cold. So you can adjust these depending on your city. And then once you run the analysis, you can clearly get to see areas of high accessibility, areas of low accessibility, and pretty much everything in between. So overlaying the population density next helps us to identify how accessible is our transport network based on where people actually live within our cities. So by doing this, we get some key insights into 2 areas. The first is areas with low accessibility and high density, giving great potential for new or improved transit hubs in our cities. And the second one is high accessibility and low density, giving potential use for our potential for mixed use developments within our cities. So we've now sort of managed to identify some key potential areas in our cities for TODs, but next we might want to see what do these areas offer to people living there, and ask questions about what's missing and what could be included to improve these locations for people. So to do this, we look at around the 15-minute city concept to use GIS to analyze the proximity of services and amenities. So we'll identify key amenities and land use and rank them by their importance within the urban environment by applying a weighted score to each amenity. So we then run multiple iterations of this model for different urban characteristics to build out a final output that reflects the entire city. For example, like one area might have a greater need for places of worship, another area might have a greater need for green space or office, and all this can be built into the analysis. So the model identifies gaps in the services and amenities, and most importantly for this type of work, it identifies what's missing in these areas, what amenities are missing. So from this, we can see kind of the areas that have a low score on proximity to services, which could be great for mixed use development, and areas with high score on proximity services, which might be good for more residential or office-based developments. So loaded with this information, we can create a site suitability analysis for cities by using a weighted combination of all these factors. So the public transport accessibility level, proximity to amenities and services, and of course, population density. But just to note at this point, this is a framework approach where we can kind of build on. So for example, there might be other characteristics which might be of importance in your city, which could also feed into this type of analysis to find more suitable locations, which is, of course, is possible within this type of work. But on this scenario, using these three factors, we can find out different weighting or apply different weightings to the analysis for density, proximity, and accessibility. And will help us identify areas for like new or improved transit hubs, mixed use development, residential, office, etc., which can then help lead the way for developing areas around our transport hubs in a way which can be beneficial to the people who live, work, and move through these areas, creating more integrated communities, bustling business areas, and healthier and sustainable environments in our cities. So that's the end of my very brief presentation. I'd like to say thanks very much to Naama and the team at Smart Density for having me on this webinar today. It's my first ever one as well, so it's been a pleasure.
You did great. Good for you.
Great. I'll hand you back over to Naama.
Yes, thank you very much. So funny little thing. I am able to share Ben's video, but we had an audio issue. So what I did, you can't say I'm not creative. I uploaded Ben's video to our LinkedIn, so each of you could watch it right now live if you click on that, and I will also share it on the screen here. We'll watch it and then we'll come back to the Q&A portion. Here it is. Here's the post. You can see it, but you won't be able to hear it on my end. So just go over to LinkedIn and watch it, and I'll make sure you watch it together. Okay, hopefully you were able to get that through your system. So let's move to the portion of the Q&A. We have about 5 minutes. So, I'll get started. And for the audience, please feel free to type your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, whatever is open. I want to ask you both. Okay, I have a few questions actually, and I just wanted to share, just because you both shared the concept of the 15-minute cities or 15-minute neighborhoods. I don't know how we got there, but there was this conspiracy that it's a way to control people and put them, all in concentrated areas, to an extent that some of my public sector clients ask me not to use that term. And I was like, why are you gifting or you're empowering those groups? So I can ask you specifically about the 15-minute neighborhood, or if there are any social challenges in implementing your work. I guess you both work with municipalities, and Johannes probably have some either private clients or partnerships. So James, just because you mentioned it last, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there was a politician came out in the UK recently that kind of had a go at the 15-minute city concept, saying that it was kind of creating like a prison cell within our neighborhoods for people. But I think that's a very narrow-minded way of looking at the situation. I think it's just giving people a choice to use cars. Like, it's not saying don't own a car and don't drive a car. It's like about making the right choice. Perhaps you do shorter journeys, or if there's a journey that can be done via public transport in a more sustainable way that will help not only you but everyone else around you and the entire planet in a cumulative way. Well, then people should take that approach. So the 15-minute city, in my opinion, is just one of those tools or one of those kind of concepts that will help us get to that particular level. I think it's a very narrow-minded thing to say that it's like making people prisoners in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And that if anything,
and yet.
you could look at if anything, you could look at rush hour traffic at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and you could say that every single person that's sat in their cars are prisoners to their cars. So yeah, I'm all for the 15. We don't have to call it a 15-minute city. It's a narrow term as such, because every city behaves differently. It could be a 20-minute city. The whole idea is just to make people aware of what can be done if we kind of live more sustainably and make use of our public transport networks in a better way. Hope that kind of answers it a little bit.
Johannes, do you want to speak to some of the challenges, or maybe specifically social challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, regarding the 15 minutes, you mean?
Whatever you feel is valuable to share.
I think James did a very good summary there, and maybe it's just a way of looking upon the organization of cities or neighborhoods future in the future, and I think places are unique, as James said, and I think it's just bringing it down to an opportunity not to be in constant traveling, and I think that is at least my core here, and that we can live in our neighborhoods. And I think the knock-on effects, if you keep that in mind as an idea of providing opportunity for life in smaller circles, I think that is a very beautiful thing. And I think during the pandemic, this happened. Stockholm became hundreds of 15-minute cities because people stayed at home, and suddenly the restaurants were, sleepy restaurants just turned out to be very vibrant areas. And it was actually a very nice experience because traveling was not the issue.
Mhm.
So maybe far-fetched. Yeah. Anyway.
No, what other challenges you know, if I'm asking you what was the greatest challenge you had to deal with, can you share to speak to that?
I think the projects I showed you, for example, the Vienna project, which is ongoing. It's I've been working on it for 18 years, and I think what challenge. The challenge is, of course, when you start, because we are, James and myself, we're dealing with sometimes very theoretical initiatives, creating a new city. We have done it before in our civilization, and we know the risks. And but then, for example, when you meet a city like Vienna, prepared to invest billions and billions of dollars or euros or whatever into settling that future city into a wider context in a sustainable way. That I think is that is spectacular for the Vienna project, and it's very similar to the Stockholm project here, but then these means of transports are already in place. It's just that they pass through a tunnel of no man's land at the moment. So I think the traffic issue and the ways we travel, and then if that is grounded in a sense, then we can avoid the theoretical neighborhoods or the dying neighborhoods or the empty neighborhoods as a key player in the infrastructure.
And it was almost ironic to see it in contrast to Singapore, right? Like with no cars after 2018. James, is there anything, that surprises you, where I'm assuming you mostly work with municipalities? Is there any patterns that you identified that surprised you over the years? I was having a conversation with an expert from the US saying that they build transit and not necessarily there's enough demand to infuse the station area to an extent that they have new transit, and they build industrial buildings next to it. Here in Toronto, when he said that, it was so foreign to me. We have such a long catch up to play when it comes to transit and transit infrastructure. I just wonder if you over the years saw any patterns that surprised you, that you felt were abnormal to your expectations, of course.
Well, I think it's a tough question, I suppose. Like we work with local authorities, as they're called here, but we also work with kind of a lot with transport planners in development planning and urban planning. But I suppose one thing I would say is that the kind of 15-minute city scenario, if we want to jump back to that for a second, one thing that the kind of whole methodology of that everything has to be within a 15-minute walk of your location. I think there needs to be a bit of flexibility on that concept, because okay, you might want to be 15 minutes from a primary school, for example, but a secondary school, you might be willing to travel a little bit further. So I think that concept should be a bit more multimodal, but green still. It should bring in cycling, a 15-minute cycle, 15-minute walk, 15-minute public transport catchment, and then you get a true an idea of, and that's the kind of feedback I've got from a lot of the local authorities when I speak to them about the 15-minute city approach, is that it's a little flawed, because people in our cities don't expect to be living next to a third level education within 15-minute walk from their house. They're willing to do longer trips, so we're looking into kind of trying to make it a bit of a multimodal analysis instead for that. But I think that's the kind of main area that we've noticed when chatting to local authorities.
It's 10:45 here in Toronto. Thank you very, very much. We'll wrap it up because we like to keep our webinars short. Johannes and James, thank you so much. And Ben, if you'll watch the recording, thank you so much for joining us. Next month, October, we're going to talk about big data in cities. Thank you. Have a wonderful
Amazing.
rest.